Good afternoon, everyone. Before we get too far down the road, just want to make sure that you can hear me. I'll take it off of mute. Just a quick check. Audio, video, everything appear to be okay?
Yes.
Anyone? Okay. Feel free to put your line on mute if you want. I'm going to mute once we get going, and then throughout the presentation, I'll unmute at several points in order to answer questions. If you have questions as we go, feel free to use the little chat bubble second from the left at the top, and I'll answer questions as we go along. Also, just a heads up, this is being recorded, so it'll be put on our website. I'll give you instructions on where this will be after the call is over, and feel free to pass it along to others that may be interested, or go back and look at this in the future if you need to. Okay, I'm going to put you on pause or on mute, and away we go. So thanks again for joining the ISO 9001 2015 update forum number 6. So we've now gone through 6 different forums. The first one was in person in August of 2013. Since then, we've had forums generally every quarter or so. If you're interested in a previous forum, we do have the November forum that's recorded and also on our website. As I mentioned, this is recorded. We will post that, and I'll show you where to get to that. So my name is Jim Thompson. I'm the founder of Concentric Management Systems in downtown Charleston, South Carolina. Unfortunately, it doesn't feel like South Carolina right now. It feels like Indiana, where I came from, but you know, at least we don't have any snow. This is the web address, acommoncenter.com. Here's our street address, 266 Meeting Street, Suite B, and then that's my direct line, 843-469-8279. So what we're going to do is go through the projected changes as they exist today. Every month, we do a little studying here and looking at publications, quality progress, articles from ISO, articles from TC 176, industry magazines, publications, blogs, etc., and try to add some new information over the past 30 to 60 days. So if you've joined in the past, there will be a couple things that are slides that you've seen before, but several updates and new information have been added to today's presentation. So first off, this illustration here is one addition, just to give you an idea of the timeline. So we've been going through this process of reviewing changes to the 9001 2018 standard since June 2012. The projection is that by September of this year, we should have an approved final draft that then goes into the international standard voting stage. And if that gets approved, which it's expected to get approved without much trouble, the thought is right now, barring any unexpected, events or what have you, September, October would be the release date. So not long now. A brief history of the 9001 standard, the family of documents. So as you know it now, there's 8 clauses. There's about 1.2 million registrations worldwide. I've read 1.1, 1.2, but this is companies that are actually registered. Whether it's 1.1 or 1.4, to me, that number is pretty substantial. And what that doesn't account for are the number of organizations that are not registered that choose to use 9001 as the framework for how they manage their business. But the breadth of the standard as being really the largest quality standard adopted globally touches over 140 countries. So right now we're basically on Rev 4. The first revision was 87, then you had 94, 2000. For those of you that have been around the history of 9001 for a while, there was a huge jump between the 94 version and the 2000 version. 2008, there really wasn't much in the way of changes, just some nomenclature and definition and terms changes for the most part. And so now we're looking at the release in 2015. Just a really quick touch on EMS and then also the OHSAS standard, because a lot of organizations tend to have those three standards as kind of the baseline of their management system. You'll see more and more organizations that have 9001 also moving towards environmental and occupational health and safety. But on this slide, 14,001, you've got the 17 elements, which is different from the clause structure of the current 9001. Over 200,000 registrations globally, and then you see that 138 countries globally are registered. So right now we are in the second revision, or ISO 9000, or sorry, ISO 14001, 2004 for revision 2, and then Rev 3, 2015, perhaps even early 2016. OHSAS 18,001 again is very, very similar to 14,001 in that it's made up of 17 elements, 55,000 registrations globally. The statistic that was the freshest that we could find was from 2009 survey, 116 countries. And what you'll see there is a lot of times folks will reference this as ISO 18001. There's actually an ISO 18001 standard, but it has nothing to do with health and safety. The proper numbering scheme here is OHSAS 18001. It's actually a BS OHSAS 18001. It's a British standard at this point, but it is projected to be an ISO standard in 2015, perhaps early 2016. And that standard number would be called ISO 45001. So if you're involved in the occupational health and safety side of things with your organization, this is the new number here, ISO 45001, once it gets approved and released later this year or early next year. So with that said, I am going to stop there and give pause for some questions, a few questions, and we'll move on from there. Any specific questions at this point? Sounds like somebody's going through a car wash. And it sounds like I'm doing a good job so far, so I'm going to go ahead and move on. As I said, I'll unpause or unmute here in a few more minutes and give time for some questions. So here's an example of a timeline, so you can kind of see from June 2012 all the way through September 2015, the steps that the standard has to take in order to go from an existing standard where the question is, hey, do we revise the existing standard? Do we use it as is, or does the standard become obsolete and perhaps replaced with something else? So that process happens about once every 5 years. So in 2012, there was an initial survey that went out to the member bodies asking whether or not there should be revisions made to the existing 2018 version. Okay, so this was a nice illustration that came from Quality Digest. I think it was in October, November of last year, but a very good visual to show how the standards kind of move through the update process. I thought this was a really interesting figure as well. So within the ISO organization, there's over 16,500 standards. I mean, that's a lot of standards to manage and to keep track of. Standards all the way from barcoding to, specific tech language, just a plethora of standards. Some of those standards an organization can get registered to or certified to, as you might hear frequently referred to. But looking at this chart on the right, this is the number of certificates that have been issued, kind of the top 10 globally. And you can see, China's by far in the lead with, 250,000 plus certificates. So there is a technical committee that's driving this change. It's basically a special group of subject matter experts. That group is called TC, which stands for Technical Committee, and they're given the number 176. So they're responsible as a group to come up with and oversee revisions, obsolescence changes to the 9000 family of documents. So back in 2012, there were these surveys that were sent out, 12,000 plus responses, 122 countries represented, saying, here's what we believe would be good edits to the 9000 family of documents. Currently, along the chain of modifications and drafts, we're past the DIS phase, which is the Draft International Standard phase. So back in November, early November, all of the member bodies from all of the different countries pulled together, basically sat around the table, took a vote on whether to approve the standard as is, and around 90% said, yeah, we approve this Draft International Standard. So the Draft International Standard became what's called FDIS, which is the final Draft International Standard. So the next step is approval of FDIS, and I've heard, anywhere from around May to July timeframe this year, that vote will be put up for approval and is expected to pass without much trouble. Okay, so one of the questions that has come from previous forums and webinars is, well, what happens to special interest or special sectors that use 9001 as the baseline? So, ISO TS 16949, AS 9100, ISO 13485, so on and so forth. There's quite a few standards that use 9001 as the fundamental building blocks, and then within their sector, they just add their sector specifics on top of that. So what is projected to happen there is that the 9001 standard gets approved, it comes out, and then the individual sectors add, on top of the new release. And there's a projection for, obviously 2016 at some point, but I have not read nor have I heard a direct confirmation that the automotive sector is 100% on board with the projected changes. I know there were kind of some headbutting going on with TC 176 and then the automotive International Automotive Task Force and major OEMs and their delegates. I know aerospace is full speed ahead, but I've heard, but I haven't seen anything in writing that says the automotive group is on board and they're going to follow suit with the new layout of the 9001-2015 revision. So one of the things that we need to look at before jumping into some of the big picture changes, some of the big differences that are going to impact organizations as they transition, is this document called Annex LS. So Annex LS is basically the standard for management system standards. So it's really kind of the common framework. So what Annex LS does, and the reason why it is important, is that if you're going to be modifying a management system standard like ISO 14001, 45001, 27001, a variety of management system standards, that new standard needs to come out in a format that abides by this content and this layout. So the idea is, instead of having an 8-clause structure for the quality side and then a 17-element structure for the environmental side or the health and safety side, the structure and the general layout will be the same for the management system standards across the board, which I think is a really good move. It helps companies that have multiple certifications that they're seeking or management systems that they're trying to manage. It's really going to help them at managing their systems. So one of the questions that was just submitted that I don't know the answer to, but I'm happy to get to do the research to give an answer for our next webinar, is what does SL mean? I don't know what SL means, but I can find out. My guess is something like standard language, or it's just the next lettering scheme that comes along. Like 16949, where does that come from? But the real answer is I don't know, but I will find out. Good question. So one of the things before we move on that you'll see is these three here: scope, normative reference, terms and definitions are the same. What's really changing dramatically is this right here. So right now we have 5 clauses, clause 4 through 8. The new revision, at least as it stands right now in the draft, is 4 through 10. So 7 distinct clauses or chapters, so to speak, in the layout per Annex LS. So the idea here again is that if I'm writing a document on document control or how I maintain my records, I can have better alignment due to the standard and the sections of the standard being aligned together. So I know some organizations choose to write an operating procedure or something like that that might be somewhere along the lines of, let's say QOP 7.1 or something like that. And what they're trying to say is this procedure is connected to some support procedure. I don't know that I would recommend basing your system in a standard layout that flows along with the standard, because look what happened in 2000. The numbering changed, and here we go again. The numbering and the layout of the standard changes. So be very careful There is no requirement to lay out your documentation or your quality manual or anything like that in this 1 through 10 structure. So don't let anyone come in and tell you, hey guys, you need to totally rewrite all of your procedures. This one says 4.2, but now it belongs in 7.1 or whatever. You don't have to do that. If you choose to do that, that's up to you, but it's not a requirement. I'm going to pause for a second. Any questions before we move to the next slide?
Just Jim O'Rourke.
Hey, Jim.
So it's not required to be, laid out in that format, but it's required to cover all elements, right? That are applicable.
That are applicable, yeah. So, very good question. There's a point in here where we talk about exclusions versus those items that don't apply. I'll get into a little more detail there, but you may just put something together in your system that works for you that says, I'm going to put you on mute. So you might create something that works for you that is a cross-reference matrix. Here's what the previous version of the standard called document control, or here's the number that we use to address the new requirement in the new layout of 9001-2015. But ideally, and this is something that came about even as far back as 2000, the idea is that you define the processes within your organization and you build documentation around those processes, not, fit your organization into the ISO 9001 bucket. It never gets adopted if you're trying to shove your organization into the ISO bucket. It feels foreign and a lot of times don't get much management buy-in. Thanks for the question, Jim. Any other questions?
Well, this is Jim again. The reason why I brought it up is some of our organizations don't have operations, quote unquote, right? They're logistics and parts warehouses and so forth, right?
Right.
So
that would still fall under operation.
Okay.
If the rest of you wouldn't mind putting your phone on mute, so when I open up for some questions, it's not as robotic, that'd be great. Any other questions? So one question here is, will this be sent to attendees? I'm going to show you where you can get it, and the reason why it's better for me to show you where you can get it is because we add things multiple times a month to this page, and you can just go there and check it out. Good question, though. Anything else? You're welcome. Okay, so expectations for the transition. A couple things that you need to pay attention to. You need to start planning for now, and there certainly are those things that you don't want to jump to conclusion with and start doing now. But here's some general recommendations from us to you. So first of all, work directly with your current registrar. There probably should be a bullet point in here, no doubt. I'm actually going to add one. Let's see. Definitely recommend that you work directly with your customers as well. So recommend working with customers on transition. The reason why that's extremely important is because for example, when we were back in QS 9000 days with the automotive sector, TS 16949 was rolled out, and there was a 3-year window for transitioning. But those those suppliers to Daimler Chrysler at the time were given an 18-month window. So, it doesn't really matter what your registrar says. If your customer comes along and says, we're going to trump that by making you accelerate how quickly you move through the transition. There is a 3-year transition timeline expected. So the thought is a September release in 2015 would mean that you need to be fully transitioned over by 2018. I would strongly recommend you start in 2016. Some folks are saying, hey, as soon as July hits and that final draft international standard comes out, then we know that there's just going to be just a couple little tweaks. And around that time, July through kind of the end of the year is when the registrars themselves and the lead auditors will be going through training for themselves. So, put a plan into place, start this year, at least in the planning phase. But what you want to do is avoid that transition bottleneck like we saw in 2003. This is going to happen, and, we can scream loud and clear, and it's still going to happen. Everybody's going to delay. It's just like, December 22nd, the post office is packed full of people sending packages, or, the last day to file your taxes. There's a bottleneck. There is going to be a shortage. Don't wait until Q3, Q4 2018 to try to transition, because what's going to happen is those companies that do, many of them are going to have a lapse in their certification. And if you don't have a waiver from your customer, you may not be able to provide products or services to them. So start that dialogue right now. Don't wait until 2018 before you start that transition. Now, one of the other things I've heard, there was a webinar that UL put on, and one of their managers had stated that that the guidelines for transitioning, and I'll share a link to this at the end, it's stating that it would be acceptable, at least in its current phase, to transition some part of your system during a surveillance audit, and perhaps another part of your system during that next surveillance audit, which is kind of strange to me. It makes sense. You would just have to document which processes within your management system are under the auspice of the new system, and which are under the 2008 version. But anyway, that just some ideas for you, and definitely start right away versus waiting until 2018. I'm going to pause there. If you guys could put your phone on mute, if it's not already on mute, I'm going to unmute the call, and then if you have any other questions, give a 30 seconds or so for that. Questions? Okay, so I'm going to jump into, actually, as long as it stays kind of quiet. I think there's one person maybe on that's not on mute. If it starts getting noisy, I'll mute everyone again. But the meat here, highlights of the current draft. So as we talked about, the structure is completely changing, with the exception of 1, 2, and 3. But 4 through 10 clauses are much different than they are now. The other thing that you'll see, similar to what you see with TS 16949, is there's an annex at the back. So Annex A, B, and C are a part of the standard. Annex A is just clarification on some of the requirements within the standard. Annex B is the QMS principles that you currently see in the front of the standard, the 8 management principles. And then Annex C is a page or two about the QMS family of standards. So there's a couple of new complementary documents in the 9001 or in the QMS bundle, so to speak, and that's what Annex C speaks to. So, context of the organization. This is something that we haven't seen before and is in the draft. And the idea here is that similar to 4.1 in the current standard, this standard wants you to address in a much more thorough way is, who are you? You know, when you say our organization is certified or our organization is registered to 9001, what does that mean? You know, what are all the pieces or the parts that are under that fence line or umbrella? Which processes within your operations are managed internally versus outsourced maybe to, you know, a third-party logistics company or a supplier to do case hardening or you know, something of that nature. Just because a process is outsourced does not mean that you're not responsible for it. But the idea here in this first section, context of organization, is that you define who you are and what all your pieces are. The other piece that's expanded quite a bit is, what are the needs and expectations of interested parties? So, you know, who is an interested party? Is it the end user? I would say yes. Is it the customer that you're delivering the part to? Is it your employees, recruiters that are perhaps an outsource to your HR department? So this section requires you to more clearly define who you are as an organization and what all your parts are. The next section, scope, and really is define the applicability of your system. There, Jim, you had asked a question earlier about exclusions, perhaps in an industry that's more logistics rather than production. You will find that the updates to the standard are much more service friendly. That's something that has been a big push. Some folks don't like the fact that they feel like because they're in production or in a production environment, that the standard's gotten a little bit too loose with the language. But you know, I guess that depends on your perspective. There is no reference to exclusions here that we currently see in Clause 7. Okay, Clause 7 today says if you have an exclusion, then you make that exclusion and that becomes a part of your quality manual. If there's a requirement that can't be applied, then you just have to document that and ensure that you're still able to provide conformity in your products and processes. So basically whatever it takes to meet the customer expectation. But that again is something that kind of goes hand in hand with 4.1. Define who you are, and this is something that the health and safety and the environmental piece or environmental side has done well with in the past. You know, define your fence line. What's your property line? Where do you stop and your supplier start, or an outsourced process starts? You know, just graphically in a documented way, define who you are, what all your moving parts are, and what the scope of your management system is. So another change is this phrase top management. That's gone and replaced with leadership. There is a requirement that's very similar to what we have now, which is the leadership's responsible for your QMS policy and making sure that your objectives align with the policy. Your policy shouldn't say, you know, quality is job one, and one of your objectives is, who cares about quality? Let's buy cheaper components. You know, those things aren't in alignment. Another thing that you'll see a bit more bulked up, which I think is great, is the commitment of leadership. And in 2000, there was an entire subclause dedicated to management commitment, and there's quite a bit more language now in the 2015 draft for that commitment and what auditors are expecting to see. Again, we want the QMS and the BMS, or the quality and the business operations, day-to-day business management system direction to be the same. And this is something, the last bullet point that I think is rather interesting, specifically on kind of, if you compare this to TS 16949 or aerospace, there was an additional role that was thrown in automotive and aero called customer representative, and that could be multiple people, but management representative was still one person that was identified within the organization that was a member of the management of that company's organization. The draft, as it sits now, is showing that a management representative could be more than one person. So perhaps some of you that are carrying the load yourselves as management system coordinators or management representatives, that may come as a bit of a relief to you. QMS planning 6.1. So this is a huge change right here. Well, one of the biggest is really looking forward and asking the question, what are our opportunities and what are our risks? So I put this illustration of a SWOT analysis here because that is often used in industry to define what are your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. But there's this key phrase called risk-based thinking that we haven't seen before. And the idea is, we need to put risk-based targets, goals, and objectives together. We need to think about what is the effect of a failure, what's the effect of something happening that we may not expect to happen, what could the impact be, what could let's say changing from one shift to two shifts, or from supplier A to supplier B, what are all the things that could possibly happen, and do your best to think about either risk management or risk mitigation or acceptance of the risk in your QMS planning. So preventive action actually is not in the standard. So you will have correction and you will have risk-based thinking, but you won't have preventive action. And let's face it, I mean, preventive action is typically, hey guys, let's hurry up and create a PAR because the audit's tomorrow, which means that the company doesn't quite understand, and the standard hasn't been very clear on what do you mean by preventive action. So risk and risk-based thinking hopefully will get organizations to be more proactive. And some sectors like automotive and aerospace have already been forced to think in this way through the use of failure modes and effects analysis or other risk-based tools. Change management 6.3. So little Dilbert cartoon here. It says, I'll need a project plan to justify the resources we need to change our software. And Dilbert says, I can make those software changes in 10 seconds. Done. And then his boss says, good work. Now all we need is that plan. So, a bit of a joke here, but the thought is you need to sit down with a cross-functional team and evaluate what could possibly go wrong and what are potential opportunities for changes to products, changes to processes, changes in personnel. So planning changes, controlling changes, and then once again, a risk-based approach, risk-based thinking approach to change management. There's a note here that says review ISO 31000. 31000 is the risk management ISO standard. So if you're interested in learning a bit more about that and kind of getting ahead of the curve here, I would recommend that you buy or check out or seek some training or what have you on ISO 31000. The extent that you control a change should be the extent in which that change is going to affect your products, your processes, other interested parties. So just keep that in mind. I mean, there are small risks and small changes versus big risks and big changes. You know, come up with a structured tool or process for change management, and make sure that you're planning for those changes in an effective way. I'm really excited about never using the word competency again. I hate the word competency because if you ask as an auditor, are your employees competent, it tends to have a negative connotation in this country. So knowledge is one of the terms that is generalized and is being used as opposed to the competency piece. So necessary knowledge, that's for you to define. What's the knowledge needed to achieve conformity of the product, of the processes, expectations from your customer? You know, what's the knowledge needed to effectively operate your defined processes? And employees need to have access to that knowledge. You know, saying, well, I've got something on the shared drive doesn't equal knowledge. Or I sent you an email on our policies and procedures. That does not equal knowledge. So make sure that, you know, those folks that need a certain level of knowledge in particular areas have access to that. I think that's kind of a no-brainer. Sufficient knowledge versus the needs for work instruction. So some disciplines, you just hire in a qualified team member, where other disciplines perhaps is more knowledge that's supplemented by visual work instruction, standard work, other key documentation or flow diagrams or what have you. This is a tip for me. This does not come from 9001, but the rule of thumb that I've I guess that served me well and I've used in the past is where the absence of a document can create a nonconformity, then you should strongly consider having that document there, you know, as a supplement to the knowledge that user brings to that process. Okay. So before we go on to the Annex A, B, and C in further detail, I'm going to take it off of mute again and see if there are any questions at this point. Go ahead.
So this is Jim again. So I talking a lot, but so to assess risk, I mean, don't you have to look at your process, how it's currently operating? So you kind of, when you go back to the car parts idea, I mean, you know, you may be at a certain risk with a given process, but in order to, you need to know where you're at before you can maybe plan your risk assessment, if you will. Or
right.
Does the other one talk about just thinking about it in terms of an FMEA, which is, you know, supposing risk?
So there's risk planning for those things that don't exist, you know, looking ahead for risk associated with new processes. And then there's risk, capturing the current risk as they exist right now. So that's where, for example, you can easily rank the severity, you can easily rank the occurrence and the detection because you're dealing with that risk or that nonconformity on a day-to-day basis. But there may be risk, let's say, in you know, bring. I think somebody said rework in the back. Hey, throw me underhanded softballs all day, please. Yeah, rework. If you've never done rework before, to perhaps you, instead of scrapping an entire unit, you want to salvage, you know, the bigger unit and just replace a component. If that's never been done before, you might want to look at what are the potential risks there, not only for a non-standard process, but you may have safety risk or environmental risk. So the idea there is bring in a cross-functional team, sit down, look at the changes, look at the risk, and calibrate those weights that you come up with actual data, actual PPM or fallout data, to make sure that you're being honest and accurate with your grading of risk.
Training is in everything we do. It's not a separate process.
Any other questions? All right, I'm going to put you on mute again and head into the.
For us on the custom side, that's what we struggle with, and a lot of times it's because the mindset is not risk-based. You know what I'm saying? It's not risk-based. So, for instance, if I tell you, take it from the custom side, we've got to have A, B, or C. You're just thinking about either. I don't have time to go. You know what I'm saying? We don't have enough staff in place, but you have to look at. So what kind of fines, what kind of penalties, what other exposures are out there?
Sometimes people, like employees, we need more people to help with this because stuff fall through the cracks. They're like, oh no, blah blah blah. They're not managing.
But here the actual risk. So it's really going to become about.
Yeah.
And like I said, even with the change of word, it's really transitioning to a change of mindset.
Yeah.
For you to clearly understand, hey, let's remove this vagueness where you figure. Oh yeah, people. You sure your people are confident? Well, no, because with I can take anybody at any knowledge level and say, follow the picture, do 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, we don't hands free me.
Versus you having to know specific, different things. I'm excited about it. We do a lot. All of our stuff has to be based on risk assessment. That's from a custom standpoint.
As I say, most of it. Now, some management's like management checklists. It's like they only come down to like I used to work at the R&P plant for 16 years. So,
okay.
Most of the time, it'll come down and because it's hot issues. But we've been telling. I say the same thing. Day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5. Something with the lines.
Yeah. Escalated beyond.
Then they want to come down to the floor, and then, we're going to do this and do this. It's like, hold up. Then I have to go down there and say, then they will call me down. All this stuff, they didn't work. I'm like, okay, let's look at it.
Hey, we told y'all this from day 1, that this wasn't working, but no, everybody want to put it off until. Yeah, so. Hello.
Who's that, huh?
See, somebody just told me.
Are we back?
Yes.
I can hear you now.
All right. I don't know what happened, but I got kicked off for a second. I could see that people were saying that they couldn't hear anything but music or chatter, but we're back. Thank you. Thank you very much for giving me the heads up. I wish I could give a prize to viewer 14. You're the big winner. Thanks for giving me the heads up. So I want to move on to Annex B. So Annex B is very similar to what's in the beginning of the standard now, which is the 7 management principles versus the 8. It's a little bit different. You'll see, engagement of people. You'll see improvement versus continual improvement or continuous, evidence-based decision-making, relationship management, not just supplier management, but relationship management. So that's what Annex B is all about. And C just gives you a little bit more detail in what's now going to be the ISO 10001 portfolio rather than what we currently call the ISO 9000 family of documents. So that 10001 gives further guidance on QMS implementation and then using your QMS to drive organizational improvement. There's also 3 different SC 1, 2, and 3. That's subcommittees to TC 176 that have responsibility for managing the updates to these bundle of documents. So what are the next steps? So we have the review of and comments given for the draft or the final draft international standard, and that final draft international standard that's out now is slated to be voted on, and that votes somewhere around the June-July timeframe. And then after that, it would be on to the final vote for the international standard piece. So here is just kind of going back to that first slide, an illustration that shows really kind of a 3-year transition of developing the document to a point where it could be approved and released in September 2015. And then we have about that same amount of time, September 2015 through September 2018, to transition over to the new standard. So a couple things real quick. There were some questions about where will this be, or can you get a copy, or what have you. And that will be, if you go to our website, which is acommencenter.com, you can just type in ISO 9001 2015, or you can go under, let's see right here, annotate this. If you go under this products, there's a drop-down box. I think it's the third on the pick list that says 9001 2015 reference center or something like that. There's a ton of great stuff on here. The other thing that you could do if you want, and you know, my marketing gal Ronnie will smack me for saying this, but this right here, you can subscribe to when we do have updates. I hate email. I get a bazillion emails a day, so I wouldn't do this. But you know, feel free to do it. Megan's looking at me like she's going to slap me on behalf of Ronnie. But you just put your email address, first and last name, subscribe, and then when these things get released as blogs, they hit your inbox. Do it or don't do it. Like I said, I wouldn't do it. My preference is just to bookmark a link and go back to checking it on a regular basis, but that's because I get way too much email. This is how you get a hold of us. So I'm Jim Thompson again. Meg Brandel's here in the office. Ronnie is here in the office and virtual, kind of goes back and forth. But there's the phone number, and then if you want to e-stalk us in any way, those are all the ways that that you can connect with us. Surprisingly, Facebook, Instant Messenger, and our Facebook page on as a Facebook group is very popular. I wouldn't have expected that. I would have thought more traffic on LinkedIn, but you know, whatever way you want to engage with us, we're here to help. With that said, I'm going to ask that you fill the rest of the time by asking any questions that you might have, or recommendations for a webinar in the next month or two, or there's some things that are that were not in here that you'd like to see the next round. We got about 8 minutes for you to open the floor and ask any questions. But while you're thinking of questions, I just wanted to look to see what the exact URL is. So it's just ISO 9001 2015 after our website. But here's an example of the video from November, and then later this week we'll have today's video published and put right here. So just click on it and you'll be able to watch it. You can also forward it along. And here's a ton of different key links. This is something that was updated this month. Transition planning guidance for 9001. So there's a lot more resources now that are free and available and online and downloads, and you don't have to pay for. So we try to, anytime our SMEs are out and see an article or a video or YouTube or whatever, we try to capture that and at least list it here. And then,
hello, my name is Ron.
Go ahead.
My name is Ron. I had to step away for a little while, but you was making reference to ISO 31000. What was that pertaining to?
That is the risk management standard.
Okay.
So the recommendation that I had was, if you want to really kind of get on top of this thing early, seeing that risk-based thinking is the biggest, kind of the biggest change coming with the new standard, go get that document. There's also a blog that one of our guys, Glenn G., who's an aerospace expert, published back in December, and it gives you all these risk-based documents that you may want to look at in trying to study how to best tackle the risk-based thinking. The one that I referred to specifically was this one right here, risk management, 2009 version. So good question.
Okay. Also, along those same lines, are you thinking risk management as a procedure or work instruction overall, or as pertains to each of our own documents that we have in our QMS?
So the direction right now is for you to define what your risks are. My recommendation, again, based on my experience, I would document that, and I'm more of I don't like 20-page operating procedures. I don't like things people aren't going to read. So
right.
I really like FMEAs. I really like, if they're used right, I like a risk matrix. And I mean, you could go into Google and just type in, opportunity space risk matrix, and you'll get, 9 boxes and 12 boxes. And so the thought is, if your process owners, let's say you have 10 process owners for the 10 processes within your organization, you want them to think about what are the potential risks for the processes that you manage. And that might be IT, it might be, HR or personnel management. One example where I've seen this used that was proactive and a really great use of the risk-based thinking is there was a matrix put together to show and consider which job titles or which functions within our organization are we really susceptible for a major hit if somebody were to win the lottery tomorrow and roll out and move out of that position. So this thought process can be applied not just to production, but those support and management processes as well. Great question. Very good question.
Okay, great.
If you have no clue about FMEAs, I think if I just put FMEA in here to search the site, there's a blog or two, the use and misuse of an FMEA, what the heck is an FMEA. So there's a lot of stuff on here that's free that you can use. If you have any questions, you can always call one of us.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir. Any other questions? If you do have questions down the road, my email address is jim.thompson@cmsicharleston.com. So just put my name in here, jim.thompson@cmsicharleston.com, and you can get to me that way. Okay. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and stay tuned. We'll probably do another webinar March, April timeframe, and certainly as the final draft gets approved and the standard gets released, we'll be having more frequent webinars. So thanks, and have a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.